Hey, welcome back. Let's talk about how we organize software projects. And we began talking about that before, where we said that the format to define what we need to be doing is a typical format is a user story. A user story is in the format of as a role, as a user, as an administrator, as an editor, whatever. So the role of the user that's interacting with that piece of software. So maybe as a user, I can do something in order to achieve a certain goal as a user. So we had this example. As a user, I can filter a list of emails in my inbox to find emails of a certain sender that somebody sent me. Okay? So that's a user story. And we said that we already mentioned that these user stories go into a list called the product backlog. Product backlog is basically a list of user stories that is ordered. And the most important or the most the ones that we should concentrate on first, the ones that we should implement first, are being ordered to the top, and these are the ones that will be added and gets taken and going to be implemented in the next iteration, in the next sprint. So when we start a new 2 weeks iteration, and I'm just saying 2 weeks, there are sprint teams that do only 1 week sprints, so they have even faster turnaround times. But in 1 week, of course, you can do less than in a 2 week sprint. So 2 weeks is pretty typical. 3 weeks is also possible. I've never really heard of somebody doing more than like 3 weeks. But the important thing is that it's a fixed time frame. Every 1, 2, or 3 weeks, so let's say every 2 weeks, we're gonna have a planning session, meaning we take a look at the product backlog, at the user stories, at the functionality that's written in these user stories, and we start from the top because these are the most important ones, the one at the top of the product backlog. And the team sits together and talks about these user stories, this most important ones at the top of the list, and thinks about whether they know enough. They know enough about the intended goal and the intended functionality of that user story in order to be able to really deliver that after the 2 weeks. Okay, and if that's possible, they're gonna select this user story and put it into the next sprint. So it goes into the sprint backlog. That's sort of like a separate list. And we take the user story out of the product backlog and give it into the sprint backlog. That means the team is supposed to be delivering this piece of functionality, this user story, in the next 2 week sprints. So at the end of the 2 weeks, we're going to take a look at them together and see what we have achieved. Okay, but we are at the beginning now, at the beginning of this 2 week sprint phase. So we've got this sprint planning where we go through the list one by one, and usually these user stories are being known up front. So that's not that the team is confronted with these user stories at the very first time in this planning meeting. Actually, they should be knowing what's sort of ahead in the list, because the product backlog is not a secret list that the product owner is keeping and showing to nobody. This is like transparency is one of the core values of Agile software projects. So everything is basically visible to everyone. So everybody can take a look and see the current state of the product backlog. Sees what will be required next, what's next in the list. The product owner owns the product backlog in a way that he or she is responsible to organize that list, to put it into priority that sort of reflects the priorities of the stakeholders, of the ones actually paying for the project, and also the priorities or the dependencies, the requirements of the people who are implementing these software, the user stories, the team, the sprint developers. It might be necessary for technical purposes that you start with a specific story before then you can do another story. Okay, so you've got some technical dependencies that you need to do X first, and then only then after X is finished, you can do Y. And the product owner is responsible to gather all that information and to bring the list, the product backlog list, into an order that reflects everything. So the team selects the user story on the top of the backlog of the backlog of the product backlog and selects it and puts it into the sprint backlog, and then breaks down, reads the story together. So we say, as a user, I can filter the list of emails to find emails from a certain sender easily. That's our user story. And then the team breaks it down into tasks, into actual little bits of pieces of things they need to do in order to achieve that story, in order to implement that story, in order to be able to show that functionality, that email filtering, at the end of the sprint to the product owner and the other stakeholders of the project. Okay, so they think about, well, what do I need to do first? Well, I probably need some button there. I need to be able to somehow specify which email address I want to filter for. So I need a user interface element for that. I need to be able to maybe sort the list, but that's actually not really written in the user story. But that could be negotiated with the product owner as something that we're going to do, implement together. Because we need it. And when we talked about the story, it wasn't really clear. But now that we really talk about it and write it down into tasks, we identify some things that we really haven't thought about. So the product owner is there to answer any questions and to help make some decisions. But the team is responsible to really break down into tasks that need to be done. And the tasks are, you can write them on an online tool, you can write them on sticky notes and post them on a whiteboard or on a wall somewhere. But it's important to see what needs to be done in order to achieve that specific user story. Okay, so that's how you plan such an agile project. You don't really plan the next 2 years. You only select the stuff that you want to do in the next 2 weeks that you are able to deliver after the next 2 weeks. And then you're going to break down, okay, what needs to be done? What needs specifically, what kind of information do we need? What kind of assets like graphics or buttons or whatever do we need? Do we need some external data that we need to provide somehow? Do we need to get data out of the database? Do we need to put data into the database? Do we need to send data over the network? Whatever it is, you're going to write it down as tasks. And then in the next 2 weeks, we're going to work on doing these tasks, right? Putting them from the to-do column of our task board into the done portion of the task board, right? We're going to do it step by step, day by day. But at the beginning of these 2 week sprints, we're going to talk about, okay, well, these are the tasks that we have identified in order that are necessary in order to achieve that certain story. And that's how you begin to work in an agile software project in a sprint. So again, the most important thing is you don't really talk about the whole picture. You don't really try to plan everything the next 2 years in advance. You really break it down into simple user stories as in a format that allows you to explain in plain English what the user of that software should be able to do. And well, a requirement is that the team, that the sprint team is actually able to deliver that piece of functionality within this sprint period of 2 weeks. If the team says, no, actually that's too complex, we don't really know how to do that, I don't think it's possible in 2 weeks, what do we do? Well, we're going to talk about how we can split it down and break it up and maybe break up a more complex story into 2 simple ones or maybe 3 simpler ones. And then only do one of these simpler stories that we can do in 2 weeks. If the team says it doesn't really understand anything, then we have a bigger problem. But again, transparency is a big value, important value of agile software development. It's important to realize, well, we don't know enough right now in order to be doing something. We need to understand more. We need to, have some decisions. We need to make it simpler. We need to talk to the customer, to the client, whatever it is that needs to be done. And the Scrum Master helps facilitate that process of identifying problems, of identifying roadblocks, and then helps find a solution for them. He's not personally responsible to find a solution, but he or she is required to facilitate, to help, to get an idea of who could we talk to? What kind of information do we need? What kind of problems do we need to solve? Who could help us solve that problems? Okay, so that's all that's going on in the planning phase. In the sprint planning meeting, that's also time boxed. So we only have 3 hours, so 4 hours or whatever it is, but we don't take more than that. To break down the list of user stories into tasks. And then the sprint begins.